lined up for you now. The Australian Treasurer, Wayne Swan, joins me now live from Kyoto. Thank you so much for joining us here on Bloomberg. How concerned are you about these global imbalances and about these competitive devaluations in terms of currencies?
Well, global imbalances have been the focus of discussion at the G20, and I guess there will be some discussion here with finance ministers this weekend. At the G20, there was a very positive statement that was made which said that basically market-based exchange rates were the way to go. They are preferable. We don't want to see competitive devaluations occurring in the system. It's very important that we do over time deal with these global imbalances, and of course some of the structural problems in the system are wider than just exchange rates. So we need structural reform. Yes, we must deal with exchange rates, but there are a range of other structural reforms required in both developed and developing countries if we are going to deal with global financial imbalances.
But Mr. Swan, Australia's dollar traded above parity with the US currency. Will this continue, and how much is that hurting your own exports?
Well, I don't speculate about the future course of the Australian dollar, but what I can say is that the strength of the Australian dollar reflects the underlying strength of the Australian economy. It reflects the fact that commodity prices are at record highs, and of course it does reflect dynamics within international currency markets. But primarily the strength of the Australian currency is a function of the strength of the Australian economy and the strength of the Asian region.
And yet you also have a dollar which is weakening. How much is the Fed causing this US dollar to decline?
Well, I think the global economy and all countries in this region have a very strong interest in seeing a strong and durable American economy. The Fed, of course, is taking this action to strengthen growth in America, and I think we can all benefit from that over time.
On global imbalances in terms of currency, I just wanted to get your thought, what exactly are your thoughts on China's currency policy? When would you like to see a bit of movement? And is that really the only way that we get along and kind of, appease these global imbalances?
Well, it's not the only factor involved with global imbalances. Yes, the level of the currency in some countries is an issue, but there are other issues as well. The G20 has made it clear, and I believe this weekend finance ministers will have the view that if we're going to deal with global imbalances, it does require structural reform across a wide range of areas. Yes, it does involve currencies, but it also involves fundamental reforms when it comes to competition policy, when it comes to retirement income systems, when it comes to social security systems and so on. All of those things vary from country to country, and they are different in developed economies than they are in developing economies.
But Mr. Swan, I understand that there is a need to do structural reform, but it does look like at the moment a lot of governments around the world are just blaming each other. It's pointing fingers, and how does that do to the G20 talks?
Well, pointing fingers doesn't solve anything. What we need to do is to make sure that we can lift global growth, that we put in place a range of reforms that will lift growth overall. If we are just going to have a discussion about how growth is being shifted between different countries or differing regions, then we're not going to go too far. Yes, we must have a clear preference for exchange rate systems which are market-based. That is the view that Australia has had for over 25 years. We've had a floating exchange rate which has served our country well. We would prefer to see other countries also have a floating exchange rate. But reform in that area will simply not work unless there is reforms across a range of areas, a range of structural reforms, including currency reform.
Now, Mr. Swan, you've also promised a reform of the banking sector, for example, calling Commonwealth arrogant for raising rates. What changes are you considering, and will that create opportunities for overseas banks wanting to do business in Australia?
Well, certainly we need to put in place a new wave of reforms that make our domestic banking system more competitive. There has been a concentration in the banking sector as a consequence of the global financial crisis, and many of the smaller competitors were weakened by the global financial crisis, particularly through the absence of securitisation. So what we want to do domestically is to put in place a range of reforms which will make the system more competitive within the Australian context. But as you're aware, we also have a raft of reforms coming through Basel III, and the government is concentrating on bedding those down as we go through the next year or so. So there will be the Basel III reforms as part of the international reforms that we are considering through the G20 process, but domestically we do want to put in place a new wave of reforms which will make our system more competitive.
Wayne Swan, thank you so much. A pleasure to speak to you, Australia's Treasurer there.